the interview.
Okay.
Well, good day to Tom Barnett and welcome again. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Kathleen. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again too. So Tom, as we know, comes from Australia, and I'm coming from New Mexico. And so today is August 19th, 2021. And we have been in this unusual opportunistic time in history for almost 2 years now. And it is quite a ride. Tom, could you do maybe a little update about what's going on in Australia today? And I'll do a little update in here.
Well, Australia's taken a turn for the worst, I think. It seemed like that totalitarian regime was going to be relatively confined to Melbourne and Victoria, but it's now making its way up through the east coast of Australia. I mean, we always predicted it, but it did seem like there was a lot of difference between the states and what they would do, but it seems like they're really trying hard to put things in place in a hurry. So obviously they're trying to push things through and rush it through. So at the moment, we've got lockdowns and curfews in various states, mostly New South Wales and Victoria. And to be honest, not a lot has changed around where we are. Police are being a bit more bullying towards businesses and then people in stores without masks, for example. But overall, I think that there's a lot more people waking up at the same time. Good. So really, as far as an update, I think that the regime is pushing through harder, but then people are waking up more as well.
Very good. Well, that's good news to hear. There was a really interesting shift. Again, goalpost changes in the United States. Governors and health departments lifted their heavy foot on the people's necks in July. And I was waiting for the next foot to fall. And lo and behold, at the end of July, early August, all of a sudden, masks required. And California has been hit really hard. Illinois is really suffering. And what's interesting, Tom, and we talked about this just a little bit before the interview, is that they're changing the wording in the orders from the health department and the governors so that they're getting wind of how we can navigate, and we're just being more creative. And I think I can. I'm not sure that I have my finger on the pulse here enough to say that more and more people are waking up, but I'm sure that is true. And I do know that good is going to win over evil. It always does. But I think this is going to be quite a ride, a continuation of quite a ride for all of us.
Yeah, same here. I think in this country too.
Yeah. So Tom, today we're going to talk about alpha and beta men. And this came as a result of one of our previous interviews. And someone posted on the interview on intimacy, they said, that is how men who are not alphas compete with men who are in a society where, generally speaking, women still look for protection, loyalty, and a man who can provide for them, even though many women don't need to be provided for. And they use their own social construct in today's world. And they said, what the beta males have done is become more effeminate to befriend a lady, since they can't compete directly with the proud alpha. So very furtively, they become more like one of the girls. This too brings up thoughts about choosing relationships carefully, I thought, and correctly. And so, Tom, I thought this would be a really important topic because in our ongoing series of the planned destruction of our men, this really brings into light a real intersection of how men are dealing with the climate today, how, the warrior man and both the alpha and now the beta. And then of course there's all the confusion on sexuality, and we, I think, can talk about that as well in this. But maybe you could just start and give me some of your thoughts. Give us some of your thoughts. Thank you.
Sure. I agree with the guy that, well, I'm assuming it's the guy that wrote the comment, because I think it's more prevalent now, but it's been that way for quite a while. It's been that way because that is one of the ways that men would ordinarily sneak their way into the world of women. If they can't enter it directly because they welcome a man through his masculinity, he will often make himself appear to be non-threatening. And to become non-threatening, he will reduce his masculinity and bring out as much of his femininity as possible in order to be, as the comment said, one of the girls. And I've seen that a lot. I saw it in school. There was plenty of guys that did appear to be one of the girls. And I don't think there was anything wrong with that, especially when you're young like that, but it was very obvious. And it was also very obvious that some of the guys were just definitely not one of the girls. And they were the ones that you would deem, I guess, to be more alpha, the ones that were more into sport and hanging out with the boys and looking at girls and talking about girls, but not really engaging heavily with them, as opposed to the ones that were just surrounded by girls and did appear to be one of the girls. So I noticed that even in the younger age group, not just in, post-adolescent adulthood. So what is it getting to or getting at? Well, it does appear to be that there is I don't even know what the word would be, but it's an unwillingness or a lack of faith in being oneself. That oneself is not good enough or enough, full stop, as they are. So they need to become and morph into something that they technically are not, and therefore living somewhat of a lie, not to the women, but to themselves. I mean, sure, to the women as well, but first and foremost, it's a lie to the self. It's a feeling of I'm not enough. I'm not enough for women or the feminine. So therefore I have to attempt to be more of the feminine in order to be accepted by it. So the lesson in that, or the problem with that, I should say, is that whenever we are removed from our own nature, we are disconnected from our source, which is, to me, I really believe is the biggest thing that, especially in this day and age, we need to return to, because that's where all of our power comes from. It's where all of our rights come from. It's where all of our sustenance and abundance and just being taken care of comes from. So the more we are disconnected from that and go searching for it in something else, the less vitality and the less health and the less connection in general we'll have, which just leads us away from happiness and contentment. And the feminine really, for me, is represented by the mother, and the mother being Mother Earth. So that is our connection. How grounded are we? How grounded are we and connected to the earth? Because then without that, we'll go attempting to subvert ourselves and to find that in the feminine, which is represented by a woman. And that to me is very nicely, as we've discussed previously, very nicely set up by those that like to control the minds and even the hearts of mankind, so that we're led to do this and we're taken away from our essential nature. That's all I've got so far. What do you think?
Well, I really think that you put the hammer on the nail, that the concept that I'm not enough, who I am, one's own personal self, is not enough. I think that was just brilliant, Tom. And I think that really speaks, worlds to the central problem in this. And I guess what my thoughts were when you said that was, and where does that come from? Because it's not as if we can say that it's just a smattering of issues. or a smattering of people that are experiencing this. I mean, this is a swath of men who are beta, enough to give them a whole name of beta versus alpha. And so where do you think that comes from? And how old do you think that is?
Well, how old? I wonder if it's as old as time itself, because within a tribe, you would have the main warriors who were the front line, so to speak, and you would have the men who were more protector in a secondary sense. And then you would probably have had the men that were the court jesters, the, I don't know, the musicians and what have you. Not to say that there can't be crossover between having creative skills and being a warrior, for example, but I just wonder if there were always more of the provider types and the protector types, and there was a clear distinction between the two. And in a tribal sense, they would have had relatively equal importance, I think. I don't know for sure, but I think that within a specific unit, as well, put it this way, I usually like to use the example of building a grand building. And in our society, we would put the architect or the head builder as the most important, and the laborer who grouts the tiles to be of lesser importance. And it's reflected in the amount of pay and compensation that they receive. But to me, even from when I was young, I saw everybody involved in the project as being equal, because without that guy that's going to grout the tiles, the building doesn't get done. It doesn't matter how great the architect is, without everybody playing their little piece along the way, it doesn't get done. So therefore, I learned, well, as I was learning when I was young, that we're all created equal, and I wanted to find ways to see that for myself. I really thought about things in terms of how society works together and how community works. And I really think that, especially in a very natural environment like that, without fake money and being able to take resources or slavery from somewhere else in order to provide for what you have in front of you, in a tribal scenario, it's very much real. It's very much life and death. Life and death could be in terms of being a warrior and protecting from an invading army, but it could also be in the provision. If we weren't provided for, that's also life and death. So I do wonder if perhaps the warriors and the providers were seen as relatively equal. Sure, I would imagine that the warriors had the lion's share, so to speak, of some of the wealth, and particularly of the women, because usually you would breed the strongest men and women together. Again, I don't know all of this for sure. I'm just piecing together from what knowledge I have of some cultures. So I wonder if they had a relatively equal construct, and that a provider man who was not inclined to compete with an alpha or a warrior, I wonder if he, at that point in time, didn't think in himself that he was inferior. I wonder if he thought, my role in this world is to provide. And the warriors are there to be warriors, and the women are there to be women, and the kids and the animals are there to be kids and animals. And he knew his place, and therefore did not feel a disconnection from his source, and therefore did not feel like he was not enough. As I say, I'm just wondering these things. I don't know. But I wonder if in those times it was different. Whereas today, because of the amount of status that is associated with your role in society and how many social media followers you might have, or how many women you could surround yourself with, or how much money you can amass, or Ferraris that you can amass, well, that then becomes a social currency or a status symbol. And so I think in today's society, that tricks people into feeling, without those things, I'm not enough, because that guy over there has that and appears more. So I mean, I think we can get into some great stuff about some conversations that, a lot of men have had with women to determine where they have actual value, and some surprising answers that guys may find. But to summarize it, before we get into any of that, I really do believe that it comes firstly from the man himself. If the man is a provider type and not a warrior type, and he thinks that he's enough because he's connected to himself and to the earth, I believe that the woman wants him as much as she'll want a warrior, depending on the woman. But it's the knowing the self. Because likewise, I've known plenty of guys who are very good football players, very, heavy set, tall, good looking guys, the typical alpha or warrior type who can't get women because he's actually very lost and not connected to himself and does not feel worthy of the women or of the feminine, and therefore is actually lost in his own in his own self. So I've seen it in many different ways.
Well, again, Tom, that was interesting, your comments on that. But again, I think it really goes back to the connection to oneself, as you say, that if you don't feel that you're enough, of course, what can you project outwardly and what will you attract? And, I look back and it's curious, but I don't see a difference between someone who is a provider and someone who is a warrior as a man. But if we look at male and female and the origins of how we have evolved, it's been a very clear delineation between the sexes. And if we look at the historical writings about the caveman time, and I don't know how much of that is really true, but the women were at the hearth and they were the gatherers and they were producing the babies and caring, and the men were out and they were hunting. So they were the providers and they were the warriors. And so I don't think that they didn't have the luxury to wonder if they were an alpha or a beta. They were a man. And there's been this very interesting infiltration into the minds to shift that. And that I find very interesting, that men have actually found themselves floundering. And I can't help but think that a lot of the programming has been very intentional to divide men and to create a very confusing line for men to walk, because a man who is a warrior can be a musician, can be an artist. In fact, a man who is connected to nature, to Sophia, to the earth, is a man who is very empowered, because we are of the earth. And so to recognize one's connection is an empowering awareness, and that ability to be able to be creative is all about consciousness. So if we're conscious, then we can be creative. And in that creativity, a man can still be a warrior, as a woman can be a warrior, but we're talking about the difference between alpha and beta. And so I wonder there, because my mind goes to the television programming, it goes to the mind control through that, through MK Ultra, through the whole new age co-opting of attempting to, in many ways, confuse us about our basic understanding of whom we are. Can you talk to some of that, please?
Sure. Well, I really like how you put it, where back in the day that a man was just a man. It wasn't necessarily that he associated with being a particular role. He was just a man. And that's very true. I really resonate with that. Also, yeah, when you said if the history is true, I mean, I'm at the stage where I don't believe we ever lived in caves. I really don't think that. I think we've always been very advanced as a civilization. We've just gone through many iterations of those. And what we're taught about dark ages, and we're so lucky now that we're not in the dark ages and caves and stuff. I think that that's just put in our minds to then worship the modern life, and that it's better than what we had. So along those lines, I feel that the way that men were taken out of being a man is that disconnection from the source or from nature and the groundedness to the earth, as you just mentioned. And one of the ways that that happened was to remove man from his essential duties. So with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and agribusiness and technology, well, then man was no longer doing manly things. And then in order to continue to provide or to hunt, he was now hunting money or hunting something else, and then providing by way of material wealth, which is fictional. It's not actually of substance. And so with that came modern foods. So when we don't eat foods that are of the earth, we are no longer connected to the earth that we are from. And that, as we've spoken about in previous interviews, leads us to hormonal differences. There's many things that actually get lost in translation if we are not eating directly from the earth itself. So that then delineates man from being a man, and he is now separated from that essential nature. And couple that with then providing or hunting by way of wealth in the fictional sense, well, then now there's that disconnection to the reality of a man's purpose. And again, another layer of disconnection from the self. And then also that can be used against him. And one of the things that I've seen, Kathleen, is how the alpha male will be revered still, but in a very different way than he may have once been, because generally speaking, that in today's world looks like professional athletes or realistically, I'll just say professional athletes, football, wrestling, mixed martial arts, sprinters. The fit, strong alpha male is put on the screen in front of people. And the thing that they do is they make a lot of money. It's very typical for a very good male athlete to be on $1 million plus of salary per year. So essentially what can happen then is you've herded all of the alpha males into one particular arena, which is the professional athlete arena, with big money behind them. So now in today's world, if the alpha male wants to say, why would you wear a mask? Why would I wear a mask? Well, then there goes their $1 million contract. So they're technically castrated by way of the role that they were given and the wealth that they're given, which is today's alpha males, as I said, hunting or providing with that material wealth. And so then you even see somebody like, I don't know his name, but he's one of those guys that is who women really think's really good looking. And he's like a movie star or TV guy. And he was modeling masks. And it's Jason someone or other from some famous TV show. Anyway, I know neither of us watch TV. So
I don't watch TV either.
Yeah.
It's lost on me, but
no, I know. I just got past that from women. Just, I can't believe this guy's doing that. He would have got paid millions of dollars to do that, by the way. So that's that element of it. And then we also have the destructive element, which is demonizing the strong element of the masculine, which is why then a lot of the men who would probably associate with being a beta male, they're not the athlete. They're not the one who's the star, the strong, the gregarious, the confident, and they also don't have the wealth usually. I mean, of course, I can give evidence to the contrary because a lot of them become, say, computer programmers and make more than the athletes. But at the same time, their way to get in with the world of women is to then become more effeminate. And so there is that divide, which comes to me, it comes from that disconnection from the self again, that disconnection from the source and of the essence of being a man. And just as you said earlier, it's not because you're a warrior or because you're a hunter or because you're a picker of fruits or something. It's because you're a man. And then as soon as we are delineated from that and have to form certain other roles in society, then that is removed now. And couple that with modern foods, modern chemicals, and modern lifestyles, we're again further removed.
Yes, very, very well said. And I think it's interesting too. Where do we get the definitions from? Who came up with alpha male? Who came up with beta male? Who sets these concepts in front of us? And I think we have to look at that, because and I don't know the history of the terminology, but I would bet that it was introduced to create a division, because the more we can segment, the more we can compartmentalize, the more we can move another concept into place, the more there is to identify with. And I mean, we see that with all of these gender issues. It's like, well, what am I? Am I A, B, C, D, E, or F? I mean, am I C on Tuesday and G on Saturday? You know, I mean, when there's all these possibilities, people have creative minds, and if there's any confusion, if they're not strongly connected to themselves, that is when that kind of programming, that kind of conditioning can really make its way into people's psyches. And that, I think, even talking about the alpha and the beta male, because if we still hold on to the concept that there's man and there's woman, and that you know, to have a feminine side as a man is to be complete, to be whole, to be a man who refuses to acknowledge their anima, and only the animus, the male side, is to deny the full spectrum of whom they are. And the same thing with a woman. A woman has a masculine side, and we step in and out of that. I mean, you're no doubt familiar with David Dated's work, and you know, he talks about how important it is for there to be a polarization in relationship, for example. So you don't want both male and female to be in that feminine posture at the same time. It neutralizes the polarity in that relationship, and it cancels that out, and it can be very damaging. So we're much more complex, and if we allow these external titles and labels to be imposed upon us, rather than just living our lives as a man and a woman and be fluid in our day, then we can really fall into some pretty serious confusion. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the typical way to see that is called the friend zone as well. When a guy becomes too effeminate to be one of the girls, and he's just a friend zone, despite his deeper longing to actually be maybe intimate with the women that he surrounds himself with. So therefore, again, there's a big disconnection. It's a big pretending to be something that you're not, and therefore denying yourself your essential nature. So that's brought out in a lot of ways. I love what you said about these constructs being somewhat manufactured, and I totally agree. I mean, another example of that is the teenager, because prior to the teenager, there were boys and then men, there were girls and then there were women. There was no such thing as a teenager. That's a relatively new construct. And with that, all of the modern definitions that go along with that to remove an adolescent from being a man or a woman. And so again, it takes us out of that. And I totally agree. That is our essence. We are man and we are woman. And everything else is a man-made construct, which is designed to remove oneself from being that essential self, the essential man and the essential woman. And so that's why, I mean, even for me, people comment on what I am, because as I've have got a known figure, or whatever you call that, they say, oh, you're an alpha, or you're a sigma, or you're a something, based on the way that I present myself in a video, for example, which isn't necessarily who I am. But whenever people have tried to, or have labeled me as something, it's never really sat right, because I never see myself as a label. I just see myself as me. And I think the more somebody does want the label of being anything in particular, or casting shame on themselves for being a particular label that society has labeled them as, then that again is not really, I don't believe that's a very healthy place to be. Whether you're proud of it, or I'm an alpha because people think I'm an alpha, or oh no, I'm a beta and I don't want to be a beta because I've been labeled that. Either way, I think it's relatively destructive because it's removing oneself from the self. And likewise, if and when I have kids of my own, I certainly won't celebrate them being a teenager. I'll make sure that when they go from being a boy or a girl, it's celebrated that they have become a man or a woman and nothing other than that.
Yes, and isn't it interesting that the rites of passage for a child to become a man or a woman has essentially, in so much of the white culture, been eliminated entirely, and so there is no great experience for someone to then move into that empowerment and to really understand what connecting to oneself is about. That journey in our modern society has been left up to the individual rather than through the guidance of the elders of that community. And truly, to me, that stepping stone is extremely important. And we have seen that throughout history, that existed, that there were rituals that a woman or a girl had to experience and learn in order to become a woman, and the same with a man. So, there's a book called The Continuum Concept by Jill Liedloff. And, I wanted to get back to a point you were making about how we, in this society, men in particular, and I think it's becoming synonymous with women as well, but men in particular gained their notoriety or their strength, their ego place through the accumulation of money, by sitting at a desk, by doing the 9 to 5 or the 9 to 10 or the 8 to 10, 7 days a week, and accumulating all this money and this wealth as a compensation, really, as Jill Liedloff would say, for an emptiness inside. That, again, that inability to connect with oneself. And I think that is pervasively present, especially in our current day today. What would you say to that?
Well, I'll say that in my experience, almost all of that is done for the feminine. So when you said earlier that a warrior can also be a musician, I totally agree. And I mean, I love combat sports and being athletic, and I also love playing music. And the creativity side is said by many people to be the expression of the feminine. And so when a guy would be amassing a lot of wealth, for example, and doing 8 till 10s, 7 days a week, it's, if you really asked him, at least in my experience, they don't generally do it for themselves as much as they are doing it to find favor in the feminine, or simply for the feminine, whether it's of themselves or a woman that he has in mind, or in hope of having a woman, or for the woman that he has. And so I think it's interesting because if he only had that connection, he wasn't so removed from his essential self and from the feminine itself, then I don't think that so many men would engage in such activity, because they're doing it for the thing that they want. But if they just had the thing they want instead, then they wouldn't go out and do as many things as men do. And some of it creates great beauty. I mean, some men write amazing songs, or paint amazing pictures, or make grand sculptures, and so many of them are named after a woman or were made with a woman in mind. So they can inspire. It can be a great thing. Certainly not saying it's a wrong or bad thing to do or to come from. But for me, I think that if we want to really get an understanding of that element of ourselves and that disconnection that may be there, then it's important to look inside as to where these motivations come from. And what is it that we're really trying to get? Are we trying to get money, or are we trying to get something beyond the money, and why, and then where is that, and is there a more efficient connection to that we just have to step out of our own way, and maybe we can have that. So yeah, again, it's not something I have a real answer to, but it's something that I've observed a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting too, you know, if we, from the time we are children, follow our passions and we really develop what is of our natural self, then we really find that we thrive. And if we end up going into a corporate structure, that corporate structure puts a lid on our creative passions. It puts it in a box, and so we become molded in a way that really changes the course of our lives. So by being able to really follow our own internal connection and our connection to nature, we can stay very aligned with whom we are. And so, you know, I think about all the confusion today, and all, you know, I mean, if men are motivated, as you're saying, to make money, to gain the hearts of a woman or of women, then somehow that message has been put into our society in a subliminal way, because that has moved us away from our own natural law of aligning with our own passions and our own sexual identity. And we do see that, you know, there's a great book called Media Sexploitation back in the 70s, talking about all the subliminal messages in papers and newspapers and TV and radio and advertisements, and it was intended to create confusion. Can you talk to that, Tom?
Yeah, it's always intended to create confusion, and it's very easy to confuse men, I believe, because men, generally speaking, I'll just say generally, in my experience, are more in their head than a woman. A woman is more feeling and naturally in her body, and a man is, generally speaking, more in his head. So being in the mind more often, it is very easy then to confuse the mind of man, and to maybe skew even slightly his value set or his sense of who he is or what he needs to do in this world to be a man. Because nature, in the world of nature, it's very obvious. To be a man, you build, you hunt, you protect, you provide. It's very simple. It just makes sense for the men to go and pick up those heavy things over there, or to fight off the other people coming into or to go and hunt that kangaroo or whatever it may be. It's very obvious. You don't have to think about it. But then as we get removed from the natural world and move towards this man-made city world, well, then you got to think now. You got to start wondering, well, where do I fit? How am I a man in this world? And therefore, because it's not just coming from the earth itself, it's coming from having the thought construct, that can be very easily manipulated, because those thought constructs come from those that constructed the realm in which we now operate. And that's so easily corruptible, you know? So that's why at least in my experience, that's how I think men have become somewhat easily moved away, and to be given things that take them quite away from being that natural man. And even from everything to how we look, the way we'll put our appearance across, the way we'll dress or groom ourselves, the way we'll speak to women in general, the way we will, I mean, it's too many things to list there, but I think we've been through some of those before. But in general, it could be very confusing for the mind, and man being more often in the mind, I think, is very easy to confuse.
Interesting. And, you know, I can't help but think about women's part in all of this. And then I think there's been tremendous confusion for women about what a woman is and her role, And there was so much manipulation. I've read numerous things recently about, and actually I think that was a presentation on Age of Truth TV, and it was an interview with Rosa Corey, and she was talking about some very specific indoctrinations that were happening in the 1970s to create a very negative opinion that was presented to women about being mothers, about having children, and that was an intentional manipulation. And so women have been manipulated as men have. And so then as women are manipulated and not at the hearth, not with their babies, and then vying for roles in business and competing with men, then men are exposed to women in different ways. In the office setting, some have bosses who are women, and so there's a whole new way of relating that has been quite confusing for both sexes, both male and female. And so it really is a matter, I see, of women becoming extremely clear about whom they are, about as much as it is for a man to know oneself, to connect to oneself, to throw away that concept that we've been programmed to believe that we're not enough. And once we throw that away and connect to the source, to nature, which is connecting to our own very core of ourself, then the confusion leaves. And I think as long as we take in all these external stories about alpha and beta and feminism and all these different roles that have been thrown at us for decades and decades now, we will be lost, and we'll just be led like a bull with a ring in its nose. And life is very simple and very beautiful. And I think the main thing that I see in all of this is we need to come back to that simplicity of whom we are, male and female, and not allow those external mind control elements destroy us. And then maybe in summary, you can make a summarization and respond to that, Tom.
It is very much a personal responsibility for women as well. I mean, obviously the topic here was about the sides or the different types of the masculine or the male. But you're right, it is very much something that we all need to do together. I feel that the way that the world is going is really just offering us that opportunity. We're only here because of a disconnection and an ungroundedness to the earth itself. And as the earth goes through its shifts, which it always does, the changing of the ages, the changing of many elements of the earth itself, we're really just going along with that and mirroring, or perhaps it is mirroring our internal states. And that's the years of generational traumas and triumphs and everything else that goes on in the internal environment that's reflecting in the external. And so as the world is going through its changes, for me, I really feel that it's so important that we take that as a reflection of us. Where are we? If the world is chaotic, is it because we're chaotic? It becomes very important to be grounded more so when there is chaos. So I feel that it's really an offer to us to say, well, how easily am I led into that? Or how well can I ground and not be part of the chaos? And the way we all do that as an individual will determine also how well we connect to being masculine or feminine or man or woman. And through that, I feel that we can actually heal that bridge together. I do feel that this world that we're seeing is this opportunity to come back to that essential nature, that essential self. And then we will inspire each other, because as women see men standing up and being men, they'll feel more inspired to be women, and vice versa. The more the women hold that space of femininity that can inspire men to be men and to step out of some of the indoctrination or the programming, then we help each other. I just don't think that it's really necessarily one element over another. I really feel that it's all of us doing a combined returning to self, and that we can all inspire each other.
Excellent. I wholeheartedly agree with you. But we would not be here today, would we, Tom, if we didn't inspire one another through our ancestral evolution. It has been a cooperative relationship of man and woman, and thankfully so, because today is a pretty brilliant time to be alive when you think about, as you say, the opportunities to truly ground at a time when we're perhaps in the most chaotic times of history and individual lives.
Yeah. And if I could offer something for men listening, if they are in that state of wanting to get back to a state of the essential self, well, and this is from my experience from treating men with various conditions, and with myself, I've got all of my own things that I still need to move through as well. And what I've found helpful for a lot of people is, as a man, to ditch all of first of all, ditch porn. If men are watching porn, you've got to ditch that. You've got to come back to where the reality of sensuality and connection and all those good things come from, which is from the women around us. It's not from porn. That's one of the things that they put out there for the destruction of men and the masculine. Second of all is get rid of everything that's not real. So that, for example, the digital stuff is not real. What else is not real? Well, all the supplements that people are relying on, and even if you're taking steroids or, all of the fake foods, just come back to natural stuff. It will always provide you with everything that you need. I've never met anybody that's come off of supplements and gone to a natural whole food diet and say that they felt better taking supplements. Never met one, ever. Everybody who's ever gone through a process of removing all that synthetic stuff and replacing all their anabolic this and my testosterone boosting that and my protein whey and BCAAs and creatine, nobody's ever said, wow, damn, I felt way better when I was taking all of that stuff than I do eating, meat, eggs, dairy, vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, oils, butters. Everybody 100% of the time feels better on food than on supplements. Yeah. And again, that's then taking or regathering that connection to the earth itself, which the synthetic stuff takes away. Getting as much sun and fresh air time as possible. A man does need to have his hands in the earth and using his hands and using his body. So it's one thing to want to make millions of dollars a year programming and writing code and doing 14 hours a day at a desk. Sure. Does it have its place? Maybe. I won't tell anybody what they should and shouldn't do, but I can guarantee that you will come more into your essence of being a man by going and digging a few holes in the garden, working with animals, working with the land, lifting things, just using your body in general. It will bring you back into your body as a man. To use your creativity to be constructive rather than destructive, and to honor the elements as much as possible. Be around fire whenever possible. Be around running water. Be around the earth. Be around in the wind. Be in the elements. Mm-hmm. And to immerse yourself in those. And more than anything, I guess, to come back to yourself. Well, as soon as you come back to that connection from where you came, well, then you'll know yourself. You'll begin to know yourself. So that's really just for men. I'm sure some of that applies to women as well, but I won't speak for women by any means. I just know that for a man, if that is, you are wondering where you stand, what is your role, forget labels, as we were speaking about, and just return to nature, which is returning to your nature. And as you do that, you'll feel that it's very natural to be a man. and it'll be very obvious to you what being a man is.
That was excellent, Tom. Thank you for that. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I had goosebumps just listening to it, your summary, because it is, it's achievable. And that's the beauty of it. There's nothing confusing about it. If everyone just did the 1 through 8 points that you said, it would all make sense, and people would be able to just breathe deeply and smile and have peace in their heart. So thank you again for another wonderful interview.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you, Tom. Take good care.
You too.